私はブドウの木、あなた方はその枝である。
The church is one, because it is one body, under one head, our Lord Jesus Christ.
You did not choose me, I chose you.
The church is holy, because the Holy Spirit dwells in it, consecrates its members, and guides them to do God's work.
Ngingumalusi olungileyo, ngiyazazi ezami izimvu, ngaziwa ezami.
The church is Catholic, because it proclaims the whole faith to all people, to the end of time.
Y yo, si soy levantado de la tierra, atraeré a todos a mí mismo.
The church is apostolic, because it continues in the teaching and fellowship of the apostles, and is sent to carry out Christ's mission to all people.
ನೀವು ಹೊರಟು ಹೋಗಿರಿ, ಎಲ್ಲ ದೇಶಗಳ ಜನರನ್ನು ನನ್ನ ಶಿಷ್ಯರನ್ನಾಗಿ ಮಾಡಿರಿ, ನೀವು ನನ್ನ ಸಾಕ್ಷಿಗಳಾಗಿದ್ದೀರಿ.
In one of her novels, Jane Austen offers this complaint about the study of history. I read it a little as a duty, but it tells me nothing that does not either vex or weary me. The quarrels of popes and kings, with wars or pestilences in every page. The men all so good for nothing, and hardly any women at all. It is very tiresome. We've all had to struggle through tiresome histories, but without memories, we're a tree without roots. History is a conversation with our ancestors whose inheritance we now enjoy. You're going to hear a story which is about you, and about those who came before you, and about those who will come after you. It's a story about sinners as well as saints. In fact, the sinners play a very important role. God rides the lame horse, they say. God carves the rotten wood. William Temple, an Archbishop of Canterbury, summed up church history in this way. When we decide wisely, God reigns. When we decide foolishly, God reigns. This is the face of an ancient Briton, whose 2,000-year-old body was recently discovered in a peat bog. According to an old legend, his contemporaries first heard the gospel from Joseph of Arimathea. When Joseph planted his staff into the ground at Glastonbury, it instantly blossomed delicate white flowers. Charming legends make poor history, but the Christian presence in Britain was undoubtedly ancient, arriving during the period of Roman occupation. This early British or Celtic church produced one famous martyr, St. Alban, and left a few traces, like this 4th century mosaic. When the Romans left Britain, German tribes of Angles and Saxons took their place. Many of the Celtic Christians fled to remote refuges, like the coast of Cornwall, where these monastic foundations from the 5th century may still be seen. Some of the displaced Celtic Christians crossed the sea to evangelize the Irish, who in turn carried the gospel to Scotland. And it was then from Scotland that Celtic missionaries would bring Christianity back into England, 2 centuries after this great circle began. Meanwhile, the church in Rome had become interested in the English barbarians. According to a famous story, Pope Gregory happened to see 3 fair-haired English boys in a Roman slave market. "Who are these?" he asked. "They are Angles," was the reply. "Angles?" said Gregory. "But to me they look like angels." and they shall become joint heirs with the angels in heaven. Gregory sent a delegation of monks as missionaries to England. Their leader was named Augustine. Landing in Kent, near the future site of Canterbury Cathedral, Augustine preached the gospel to Ethelbert, the local king, in the year 597. Ethelbert's queen, Berta, was already a Christian. This church of St. Martin in Canterbury is built around Berta's chapel, where for 35 years she prayed for the conversion of her people. Not long after Augustine's arrival, Ethelbert and 10,000 of his subjects were baptized. Canterbury was established as the seat of Roman Christianity in England. Here is the word manifested unto you. Thus reads this Saxon inscription in a 10th century church. But for the barbarians of the Dark Ages, life was hard, then you died. What impact did the gospel make in those days? We find a clue in these words from the 7th century. Our life is like the swift flight of a sparrow through a banqueting hall in winter. The sparrow flies in through one door of the hall and then out through the other. While he's inside, he's safe from the winter storms, but after a few moments of warmth and comfort, he vanishes into the darkness from whence he came. In the same way, we appear on the earth for a little while, but we know nothing of what went before our life or what will follow. Therefore, if the teaching of these Christians can reveal any more certain knowledge, we should follow it. A generation after Augustine, the Celtic monastery of Iona in Scotland sent a bishop monk named Aidan to Northumbria in northeast England. On the island of Lindisfarne, Aidan established a great missionary center. It was said of Aidan that whenever he met anyone, whether high or low, he stopped and spoke to them. If they were heathen, he urged them to be baptized, and if they were Christians, he strengthened their faith. The Celts practiced a down-to-earth spirituality that one is tempted to say sounds rather Anglican. They kept an awareness of God amid the cares and occupations of daily life. Penance was not a legal device to relieve guilt, but an act of habitual worship. And progress in the Christian life was not just the work of monks and clergy, it was the task of all God's people.
God with me lying down, God with me rising up, God with me in each ray of light, Christ with me resting, Christ with me waking, Christ with me watching, every day and night. God with me protecting, the Lord with me directing, the Spirit with me strengthening, forever and forevermore.
Women played an important role in the Celtic Church. St. Hilda founded a monastery here at Whitby in 657, where she ruled as abbess over a community of men and women. Hilda made this desolate spot a place of learning. 5 of her monks became bishops. Aidan believed in indigenous ministry. Foreign missionaries like himself should become dispensable. Anglo-Saxons should minister to Anglo-Saxons. St. Ced was one of many Anglo-Saxons trained at Lindisfarne. Sent south to preach to the East Saxons, he became their bishop. St. Peter's, one of many churches he built in the 7th century, still stands today. Later, Ced would travel to Lastingham, where he founded a famous monastery in the wilds of Yorkshire. It is recorded that he wished the fruits of good works to spring up where formerly lived only wild beasts or men who lived like beasts. Cuthbert was another Anglo-Saxon trained at Lindisfarne, where he eventually became prior. His fame as a teacher, pastor, and healer was widespread, but he loved solitude best, content on this island near the priory with the society of angels. On one occasion, Cuthbert spent the night standing in the sea, singing praises to the sound of the waves. When he returned to the beach at dawn, sea otters rolled at his feet, drying him with their fur. He gave the otters his blessing, and they departed into the surf. Celtic Christianity was doomed by its own distinctiveness. It was too exotic, cut off from the mainstream of Christian Europe. It kept a different date for Easter and tended to disregard the authority of Rome and Canterbury. Celtic independence seemed a threat to Christian unity. This has been a recurring dilemma. How can the Church be true to its local situation and still be part of something universal? Who should prevail in England? The Celtic Church of the North or the Roman Church centered in Canterbury? Representatives of both sides met to settle this question at Hilda's monastery at Whitby in the year 664. A monk named Wilfrid carried the day for the Roman Church. Wilfrid had become utterly entranced by the majesty of Rome. Not for him the humility of the Celtic bishops, who shunned horseback in order to go on foot as the apostles did. When Wilfrid was consecrated soon after the Whitby Conference, he was carried on a golden throne borne by 9 other bishops. Wilfrid's winning argument was this: though your Celtic fathers were holy, do you think that their small number in a corner of a remote island is to be preferred before the universal Church of Christ throughout the world? 100 years later, at this monastery not far from Lindisfarne, the Venerable Bede, England's first historian, would sit down to write the story of his country's conversion to Christianity. The climax of his story was the merging of Celtic and Roman traditions at Whitby. Bede knew that the future belonged to the organizational genius of Rome. While the Celts were wandering far and wide without ever coordinating their efforts, the Roman Church was building a strong hierarchy that would dominate Europe for 1,000 years. Yet Bede's hero was not the pompous Wilfrid, but Cuthbert, who was able to sacrifice the beauty of his own Celtic tradition for the sake of a more universal church. The tomb of Cuthbert and the tomb of Bede would come to lie beneath a common roof at Durham Cathedral. Anglo-Saxon Christianity lasted for 4 centuries after Whitby. Saxon churches baptized the landscape, laying the foundations of parish geography. Missionaries were sent across the English Channel to convert the tribes of Germany and Friesland. Even the Danish plunderers of the 9th century were swayed by Saxon preaching. This English church is decorated in the Scandinavian style. Conversion has barely tamed its Viking spirit. In 1066, the Normans conquered England. Provincial Saxon ways were soon displaced by more up-to-date Norman fashions, just as Saxon circles were subordinated to Norman arches on this baptismal font in Canterbury. The force and vitality of Norman culture can still be felt in the overpowering cathedral they built at Durham. As the medieval culture flowered, England clothed itself in churches. By the time of the Reformation, there would be 46,000 churches across the land, ubiquitous reminders that daily life was lived beneath the aspect of eternity. The monastic ideal struck deep roots in England. At the monastery of Rievaulx, secluded in a Yorkshire dale, a 12th century abbot named Aelred urged his 600 monks to be an intercessory community. "Take the whole world to your loving heart," he said. "Think of honest folk and rejoice, of the wicked and grieve. Pity those in any way afflicted or distressed, the wretched poor, the lonely orphan, the helpless widow, the unsuccored mourner, the homeless vagrant, the discontented maiden, the peril of those at sea, the temptations of the monks." The cathedral was a visible icon of a divinely grounded universe. Measure, weight, and number mirrored the rationality of God. The piers, arches, and ribs distributed the forces of gravity from part to part, just as the chain of being distributes God's love to every part of creation. O grace abounding, that had made me fit to fix my eyes on the eternal light, until my vision was consumed in it. Awesome is this place. Truly, this is the house of God and the gate of heaven, and it will be called the court of the Lord. The medieval ideal of a total Christian society, temporal and spiritual bound together within one church, would break apart over the question of power. How do bishops and princes share power? Who makes the laws? Who runs the courts? Who controls the wealth? Thomas Becket, Archbishop of Canterbury in the 12th century, believed that the rights of the clergy were supreme. Princes should bow their heads to bishops, he declared. Becket made such a career of opposing royal policies that a frustrated King Henry II was driven to say, "Who will rid me of this meddlesome priest?" 4 knights overheard the king and set out for Canterbury Cathedral. Entering by a cloister door, they murdered Becket as he knelt in this chapel. Becket's tomb quickly became the most popular shrine in England. These worn steps to the shrine bear the traces of countless pilgrim feet. We may wonder at Becket's appeal. He was fanatically obstinate. Better judgment might have prevented martyrdom. But in the people's eyes, he died without resistance for the principle that all earthly powers must bow the knee to God. Such principles are unpopular with kings. 5 centuries later, Henry VIII would destroy Becket's shrine and scatter his bones. Its place in Canterbury Cathedral remains empty to this day. The highest achievements of English medieval Christianity are not found in the headlines of history, nor are they found in the inspired legacy of stone and glass sanctuaries. The highest achievements of faith were invisible. They took place in the interior landscape of the remarkable 14th century mystics. Julian of Norwich lived for many years as a recluse in a room attached to a church. The room had 2 windows. One looked out on the world, one looked in to the altar. Julian recorded her spiritual journey in the first book ever written by a woman in English. Her words were set down during a dark time of plague and war.
If there be anyone living who is always kept safe from falling, I know it not, for it was not shown me. But this was shown, that in falling and rising again, we are always held close in one love. Would you know your Lord's meaning in this? Love was his meaning. Who showed it to you? Love. What did he show you? Love. Why did he show you? For love. The Lord looks upon his servant with pity, not with blame. And all shall be well, and all shall be well, and all manner of thing shall be well.
How healthy was the Church on the eve of the Reformation? Historians still debate this question. Salvation had become mechanical, a bureaucracy of penance. As soon as the coin in the coffer rings, the soul from purgatory springs. If you were rich, it was all the easier to buy the prayers to open heaven's gate. Holy relics were big business. You could shop for a branch from the burning bush, a splinter from the true cross, one of the stones that killed Stephen, Mary Magdalene's tooth, Jesus' swaddling clothes, a phial of the Virgin's milk, or a feather of the Archangel Gabriel. The flame of religious vision was burning low. The Church was cluttered with superstition and corruption. The 15th century produced not one English saint. On the other hand, the lavish beauty of late medieval churches provides considerable evidence of lingering vitality. The great central tower of Canterbury was financed by individual donations a few decades before the Reformation. Were the donors expressing genuine devotion, or were they merely purchasing a place in heaven? Medieval society was highly ordered. It didn't change very much. You knew where you fit in. You knew what was expected of you. But in the 16th century, this closed system was shattered by the rise of nationalism, market capitalism, and the scramble for power among new social classes. Suddenly, people were set adrift, no longer sure about their relationship with society or with God. Stripped of the old certainties, the sensitive conscience seemed to stand naked before divine wrath. God was good, humanity was sinful. What could ever mend this awful fact? Holy oils and holy wells, ashes, incense, votive masses, purgatory, penances, pardons, and pilgrimages? These rituals of medieval religion had lost the power to reassure. A German monk named Martin Luther provided the answer. We must stop trying to save ourselves, he said. We must place all our hope in the saving death and resurrection of Jesus Christ. God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, to the end that all that believe in him should not perish, but have everlasting life. The quest for personal assurance of salvation became the driving force behind the Protestant Reformation. We are saved by faith alone, said the Reformers. If there is anything that hinders faith, do away with it. Protestant ideas spread slowly in England. There were those who eagerly discussed Luther's new theology in the taverns and the universities, but it was not ideas that started the English Reformation. It was politics, the struggle for authority between king and pope. The outcome of that struggle would be the reshaping of the English church and the evolution of Anglicanism as a unique tradition.